Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel or channels. This is SC Coleman, author. In this video we're going to be talking about the subject of water. However, it is not just about water, as in there's more involved. So that's essentially the reason why you could think of it as a plan or water control plan, or a plan utilizing water as a control. That's sort of a way to think about it. So to understand this, we should probably look at it in context of military application, because that's really what we're talking about here. Essentially speaking, it's a military strategy. I'm sure many have seen the TV show or read the books Game of Thrones. And in there, the dad of the Lannister people says that armies march on their stomach. Of course, you know, they don't march on gold, that sort of thing. It doesn't matter how much money you have, if you don't have any food, it's worthless. That type of thing. Well, water is in many cases more important than food. And it's commonly known that your water supply in an encampment or a town by an army specifically has to be protected, because if your water supply gets poisoned, that can lead to catastrophic deaths. Hence things like the Black Plague, cholera, those specific types of historical events where people died because they drank contaminated water. And of course, many knew that it was contaminated, so they would, drink beer or something else, or they'd boil it, whatnot. So the idea of your enemy intentionally poisoning your water supply in order to reduce your capabilities, weaken you, etc., is commonly known and has been known for a long time. Yet, strangely, today, the enemy is quite literally given complete and unrestricted control over your water or our water. It doesn't matter who it is, but they are in fact the enemy. It's the same thing as you're in a camp or a town, right, a military camp, and you just say, you come on in and establish control over our water supply, and we trust you to administer it properly, even though you're an enemy. And if you don't, then, well, there's really nothing you can do about it, right? It's quite ridiculous. Of course, in this situation, I think perhaps many are in denial. They don't want to believe that the enemy, quote unquote, has taken over control of the water or whatnot. So for the purpose of this video, we're going to be talking about that aspect in terms of evidence, paperwork, mostly memorandums of understanding, the black and white, as it were, where it's spelled out, and I don't care how many people say it's the ramblings of a lunatic, ravings, or etc. All of these things are not written by me. They're written by somebody else, and they are detailing very specific aspects of a practical and operational nature with names and dates and other nonsense, right? Anyway, many of us, personally, have in some capacity experienced the utilities leash, which is a little bit different from the financial leash. Basically meaning that if you don't do something, they threaten to cut your utilities off. Or something similar, right? You've got people in like Toledo and Ohio who had driver's licenses revoked and suspended because they failed to show up to court, didn't pay certain types of fees, or didn't pay property taxes, those types of things. There are, in Kentucky, as far as I'm aware, the addition to utility bills, including water, specific charges for so-called 911 services, and other things like that, right? And then, of course, if you do anything that the so-called, government individuals don't like, then they'll just revoke, they'll take away your utility connections and things like that, shut it off, your electric, your water, etc. So this is going to be specifically focused on water and how this mechanism is being harnessed globally by enemy forces with the specific approach of not just control, but also absolute control, and in many cases, intentional destruction. And of course, they won't be above line, as we'll find out. So this first document here is called the Memorandum of Understanding between the Global Water Partnership, GWP, and the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. Well, aren't those some great names there? And this is a line that should be focused on. It states it defines the basic principles for a partnership. Anybody who's ever filed business documents knows that when you state something like that, a partnership is so-called legal entity classification for like tax filings and things like that. The Global Water Partnership, GWP, established in 1996, is an international network open to all organizations involved in resources management. Here's you can get their read between the lines doublespeak crap here. GWP was created to foster integrated water resources management, IWRM. The IWRM approach advocates a move towards a more integrated and coordinated water development and management process than is currently practiced. This move assumes dialogue and partnership among these actors. So yeah, basically a centralization of control over water resources globally in the hands of whoever these people are, right? That's what they're talking about. They just use a whole bunch of different words to try to pretend like that's not what they're talking about. But that's what they're talking about. They want to forcibly acquire control of the water so that they can use that as a leveraging mechanism. And we'll even find that word used here, leverage. The IWRM approach requires many decision-making processes to be taken at the lowest appropriate level, normally local governments and communities. That's what we're talking about. The International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, established in 1990, is common to building and serving worldwide movement of local governments to achieve tangible improvements in global environmental and sustainable development through cumulative local action. I think we all know what that means. UCLEI further recognizes that whilst it has the capability of mobilizing local governments to action. Let's repeat that part. ICLEI further recognizes that whilst it has the capability of mobilizing local governments to action, that sounds like the quote-unquote local governments take directive, as in orders, from whoever this individual is. I mean, they're not really local governments, are they? They are, in fact, the subordinates to ICLEI. The complexity of IWRM is such that working in this area can only be done in partnership with other organizations. I believe we know what that means. Modes of collaboration include having access to each other's network and member through the respective secretariats. Inform about and invite each other to activities regarding the role of local governments in the management of water. That, again, sounds like they are in fact deciding what they quote-unquote local governments are going to do. Meaning those quote-unquote local governments are an extension of them and obviously not the people in the area and whatnot. That's essentially speaking the idea of an empire, right? Parties will participate in each other's major events globally and regionally when relevant. Strengthen the links between the organizations at the regional level. Identify specific areas for cooperation and joint efforts to mobilize funds for strengthening the capacities of the local governments in integrated water management and the implementation of the water campaign. That's, again, like the military operation concept of the word campaign. This is a campaign leveraging water, quote-unquote, water resources, and also against water resources and all that stuff so that they can, of course, acquire it and whatnot. So, yeah, it's a campaign, like a military campaign. The water campaign of ICLEI. The water campaign of ICLEI has been developed in response to a need identified by local governments, members of ICLEI. The water campaign builds upon ICLEI's experiences within the Local Agenda 21 campaign The campaign has a global scope with special emphasis on Africa, Latin America, South Asia, Central Asia, and Eastern Europe. So basically the entire world. And of course, it also has a focus on the United States, even though that's not included here. What's interesting here is that they use the word associate programs. That's PROGRAMMES, specifically spelling used extensively in the United Nations sectors. Strong links will be established between the water campaign and the GWP regions and national focal points. The water campaign will identify and report on successful cases or processes of water partnership and act as at the local level. The experiences of these champions, that's in quotation marks, will be disseminated through the GWP network. Here down at the bottom they have a little definition. Water governance refers to the range of political, social, economic, and administrative systems that are in place to develop and manage water resources and the delivery of water services at different levels of society. To be effective, water governance should be transparent, meaning they communicate and don't hold secrets from each other. Open, accountable, participatory, communicative, incentive-based, equitable, coherent, efficient, low transaction costs, integrative, and ethical. So basically, yeah, what we talked about in so many words, they want to essentially be able to leverage water unilaterally at their discretion against the populations. GWP and ICLI have, together with UNDP, committed themselves to address the politics of water through dialogues to be organized at the national and local level. The key actions will take place within the regions and the countries, and the GWP regional TACs have a special responsibility for this dialogue to supplement jointly with UNDP country offices and SURFs, SURFSs, and ICLEI regional country offices. Signed Khalid, well, it's actually not signed, but anyway, the names are Khalid Montedula in Stockholm, Executive Secretary, whatever the hell that is, Conrad Otto Zimmerman, Secretary General, and then there's their fictitious little criminal enterprises there. Alright, the next one is a memorandum of understanding between the Alliance for Water Stewardship and a Scottish charitable organization and the CEO Water Mandate. I believe that is in fact the actual name of the fictitious entity is CEO Water Mandate. Sounds really weird, but a initiative of the UN Global Compact. Implemented in partnership with the Pacific Institute out of Oakland, California, allegedly. Now, I think it would be interesting to note here that Alliance Water Stewardship, AWS, are also the initials for Amazon Web Services, AWS, which is the centralized quote-unquote data sharing and storage hub for these alleged government entities. AWS is a global membership collaboration with a mission to ignite. That word is very important to note, ignite, because it falls right in line with the Jesuit mission of going and setting the world on fire. So, you know, cryptography and code and using special words and things like that with different meanings and whatnot. Recognizes and secures the social, cultural, and environmental value of fresh water. Notice that word there, secure value of fresh water. I mean, you know, they're using all these fancy words to basically just keep reiterating and saying the same thing that I said, which is that it's a military campaign to gain unilateral control over water in general so that they can leverage that quote-unquote essential resource against local populations to essentially enslave them and force them into quote-unquote compliance. Convening AWS members from different interest groups to build capacity and share knowledge to advance best practices. I think we know what that means. Here's this part. It says building consensus within its multi-stakeholder membership to define the essential elements of good water stewardship practice as articulated in the AWS standard. So of course they're going to define it for you because it's not like, because most people have an idea of good water stewardship, but that's not, of course, what they're talking about. They're not talking about good water stewardship in the way that a regular person might think of that. They're talking about it in the context of their definition, which is going to relate to their military campaign, which is disguised in all of this excessive wording and gobbledygook and vague nonsense. Providing a system of recognition through which those who meet the requirements of the AWS standard, as evidenced through third-party certification, can make credible claims of good water stewardship performance. And that's, of course, going to be one of their control mechanisms, of which the main one is usually going to be, of course, finance, since they are the quote-unquote finance cartel, a word that I like to use a lot. Now, their mission is also to mobilize partnership with governments and other stakeholders. I wonder who those other stakeholders are. Commit to action lists supply chain and watershed management and collective action. Of course, as we are all aware, for anybody who's ever bothered to study Stalinist, quote unquote, that label, Stalinist, types of propaganda, well, that's exactly what this crap is. It's nasty activity and malicious and vindictive plans cloaked in nice words and a bunch of vague euphemisms and things like that. Identify and reduce critical water risks and contribute to water security. In a fragmented sector, this MOU represents a commitment to facilitate convergence, aligning efforts for greater efficiency and promoting collaboration. So yeah, basically centralized control across the planet. Data and capacity, enabling access to data tools and resources in a more aligned and efficient manner, demonstrating AWS and the mandate's commitment to building a capacity and driving the widespread adoption of water stewardship practices across the sector. I love how they just love to declare these mandates and say, we're going to give ourselves the authority to do this, and we're just going to go and do it. And the reason why we're going to do it is because we said so. Right? They do that all the time. Collective action through connecting leaders in the water sector and building necessary partnerships, AWS and the mandate aim to catalyze collaborative initiatives in priority river basins and watersheds. By bringing together businesses, NGOs, local communities, academia, that's an interesting one that we don't see referenced in the rest of these paperwork, and funders. This effort seeks to harness demonstrated leadership and commitment as a catalyst for meaningful collective action. Commitments align key messages, AWS International Water Stewardship Standard. We mentioned that tag word before. Maps and share events, campaigns, and communication opportunities, support joint advocacy efforts, and amplify our shared mission. So basically, you've got a different sort of military components by another name who are supposed to act together in unison to carry out this quote-unquote mandate. Establish and communicate a harmonized pathway for businesses to engage with AWS and the mandate, utilizing tools and approaches developed by both parties to transition from site-based action to broader basin-level collective action. Now, here, interestingly, it talks about extending the scope of AWS Impact Accelerators, and that immediately brings to mind a so-called university program called Apex Accelerator in relation to the Ohio Small Business Administration. But you find these words repeated throughout various, unfortunately similar documents. Partner to identify and mobilize the necessary resources to achieve collective action ambitions within these priority basins and watersheds. Extend mutual support in areas that align with shared objectives of this MOU. The parties commit to conducting quarterly review meetings to assess progress against the annual work plan. These reviews will include updates on actions taken, milestones achieved, challenges encountered, and opportunities for improvement. Designate representatives from AWS and the CEO Water Mandate will oversee the execution of the work plan, ensuring that responsibilities are clear and that progress is tracked effectively. Each party will identify a primary point of contact responsible for coordinating activities and communication. The parties will explore joint funding opportunities and resource mobilization strategies to support the initiatives outlined in this MOU. This includes identifying potential funding sources, in-kind contributions, and shared staffing arrangements to ensure the successful implementation of the annual work plan. And of course, many of those funding efforts are going to include extortionary or coercive measures to force people to pay ridiculous fees and prices for nonsense. The parties intend to share or disclose to each other the information necessary for the specified purposes of this MOU. Confidentiality. All information, including personal information that comes into the possession or knowledge of the parties in connection with this MOU, shall be treated as strictly confidential. No personal information shall be communicated to any third party without the prior written consent of the person concerned. Each party agrees to comply with all relevant provisions of blah blah blah. Treat confidentiality. Treat information received from the other party in confidence and take all reasonable measures to preserve its confidentiality, integrity, and safeguard against accidental or unauthorized access, use, or disclosure. Now, why on earth would they want to do that? Obviously, it's for the quote-unquote protection of the ones involved, whatever that means. And here's an interesting one here. Survival of obligations. The obligations outlined in this section shall survive the expiration or termination of this MOU. Conclusion of collaboration, ensuring continuity where necessary. And there, of course, you have that little tagline word there, continuity of government. Just love hearing that one. That's sarcasm. The parties agree that the laws of Scotland will apply. For administration, they have AWS Scott McCready, Chief Strategy Officer, and Sea Water Mandate George Schuler, Deputy Head. I love how these people always seem to be like assistants or secretaries or deputies or something like that. Signed 25th of September 2024. Now the next document is Memorandum of Understanding between the National Cybersecurity Center and the Drinking Water Inspectorate. I just love these really creepy, disturbingly vague names that they love to, lofty names, of course, that they love to give themselves. The shared aims of this MOU are to enable closer working between the participants, explains how the NSC and DWI will work together in the following areas. NCSC, mind you, is the National Cybersecurity Center, and DWI is the Drinking Water Inspectorate. That name is awful. Drinking water, like who came up with that crap? That sounds like something you would find in like Cuba or the Soviet Union. Development of cybersecurity standards and guidance, information sharing, cooperation in relation to incident management and management of this MOU. NCSC's mission is part of the Government Communications Headquarters and its statutory power and functions, blah, blah, blah. GCHQ is a central government department which is put on statutory footing by the Intelligence Services Act, and who gives a crap? Here's another stupid cover organization identity to carry out hostile, belligerent activities against the population, as usual. As part of the GCHQ, the NCSC is appointed as CSIRT. This is really tedious to read. Computer Security Incident Response Team. That's nice. Under the NIS regulations, which place it under a number of duties. Yeah, here they're just more of the same crap. Just throw words at it and numbers and labels and stuff. Provide early warning. The early warning systems. That's a word you find repeated a lot, especially in intelligence circles. And it's usually some stupid garbage where you, according to different mechanisms, plan out a probability of someone or something doing something you don't like. Or just doing something in general. That's what early warning systems relate to. It's basically guessing whether or not something's going to go a certain way. And they're usually, well, I guess it all depends, but it's usually just like national security. It's just like another word that is used to carry out some type of nasty and vindictive operation against the population for some lied about pretext. Dissemination of information to relevant stakeholders. And you love how they always include that stuff in there about stakeholders. The special privileged individuals, that's what they're talking about. Establish relationships with the private sector to facilitate cooperation with that sector. So basically, control and coerce the quote-unquote private sector, which is, of course, businesses and whatnot, to doing what they want them to do. Cooperate with NIS enforcement authorities to enable the enforcement authorities to fulfill their obligations under these regulations. Which regulations? This Memorandum of Understanding? Quite stupid. The Drinking Water Inspectorate, DWI, is the independent, notice that word there, independent regulator of drinking water quality for public supplies in England and Wales and operates as a business unit within the Department of Environmental, Food, and Rural Affairs. These words should not be going together in that consecutive order. That's very disturbing. DWI's role includes preparation and publication of guidance documents to assist operators of essential services. That's vague, but I think we know what they were talking about there. Really. Publication of enforcement policy relevant to the NIS powers, and protect the continuity of the essential service. There you go again with that word continuity. The DWI are designated as a competent authority for the water sector for the NIS regulations on behalf of DEFRA under the NIS regulations. The competent authority must review the application of regulations and prepare and publish guidance. So basically just make up whatever they want. Keep a list of all operations of essential services which are designated or deemed to be designated under Regulation 8, including as indication of the importance of each operator in relation to the subsector in relation to which it provides an essential service. Who wrote that? That's awful. In order to fulfill the requirements of these regulations, consult and cooperate with relevant law enforcement authorities. I always love when they put that stuff in there. Relevant law enforcement authority. Jeez. Competent authorities in other member states. That's nice. Other competent authorities in the United Kingdom. Part of the inspectorate's role is to understand compliance against sector-specific targets set for the industry. Who talks like that? The DWI undertakes the verification activity to determine the accuracy of company self-assessments against the CIF. Where standards are not met, the DWI will use the NIS regulations to drive improvements in compliance against the targets. That sounds so, hateful, The way they're using targets in this context, you can almost imagine some sniveling, wart-covered witch just hiding behind the scenes, plotting their revenge or something. The NCSC, when notified of an incident, will disseminate information relevant to other OESs in the water sector and others by way of early warnings, there's your word again, alerts, awareness of risks, etc., as per its duties under the NIS regulations. It's really nasty stuff here. Regulation 6 of the NIS regulations covers information sharing by enforcement authorities, DWI. The participants agree to take a constructive and transparent approach to the exchange of information. Blah, 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 blah. The NCSC sharing with DWI relevant intelligence, including cyber threat assessments that are likely to affect organizations regulated by DWI, where it is not commercially sensitive or confidential, or, blah, blah. DWI will ensure any safeguards agreed with NCSC are put in place and maintained, including limiting distribution within DWI to named individuals of those with appropriate security clearance if required. Now, why would they want to do that? Of course, they're going to say some stupid nonsense, but we all know it's just to protect their little operational nasty plans, and so that when somebody finds it, they don't obviously just point it out to everyone and say, hey, hey, you in this neighborhood over here, these dudes are going to just destroy your lives and run you out of town so that they can turn your place into some revenue machine so that they can make it into some kind of tourist attraction or whatever the hell they want. Or they'll just kill off the local population because they need to reduce the population of the planet, right? And probably a lot of people in many different areas won't believe it, no matter how much mountain of evidence you dump on them and say. And this guy down the street is signed on this paperwork where he's basically, saying that they're going to send animal control to kick down your door and take your children, and if you don't like it, they're going to shut your water off and siege you into death, stuff like that. This stuff's crazy. Anyway, well, it's evil, but information about the cybersecurity incidents as far as set forth in Annex B with the NCSC, both on an anonymized, systematic, and aggregated basis, and blah, blah, blah. I think we get the rest of the idea. We're going to monitor and spy on everybody and do a whole bunch of nasty crap and coerce people into going along with our vindictive and evil plans. The NCSC will respect the confidentiality of information which is shared by DWI with the NCSC and store it securely. Can't have that stuff getting out. Like this paperwork here. Any freedom of information request made to DWI for information the NCSC has supplied to DWI should be redirected to the NCSC without delay, and DWI shall take such steps as NCSC may specify in relation to handling of the request. And I expect whoever is filing those documents comes from the same attorney's office, just changing out the letterheads on how they operate paperwork. Where appropriate, the DWI and NCSC will seek to amplify each other's messages and an awareness for their different interests, promoting learning, constant guidance or consistent guidance and standards, as well as key messages on information and cybersecurity. That sounds like a very nice way to say that they're going to actively operate censorship schemes and systems. Now, interestingly, here we have a redaction right there, where on the next page, the names of the people are left. What kind of incompetent, lazy moron didn't bother to flip the page? So here you have redacted the names, Team Lead Civil Nuclear and Wider CNI or CNJ, whatever, NCSC, and Deputy Chief Inspector Drinking Water Inspectorate. And their names are redacted, but here on the other page you have the signature Richard Horn, CEO, and Marcus Rink, Chief Inspector, Drinking Water Inspectorate, and the signature date is 2024. These individuals will maintain an open dialogue between each other in order to ensure that this MOU remains an effective and fit for purpose. They will seek to identify difficulties in working relationship and proactively seek to minimize the same. So I guess we should probably just be referring to them as regents, because that's basically what they're doing. They've got this pretext paperwork here where they give themselves all these dramatic and wide-ranging capabilities and quote-unquote powers and privileges, and of course they're the only ones who can administer it, as it were. So yeah, basically they're the regents here, done in the name of so-and-so, done in the name of Deputy Chief Inspector or Assistant Secretary of Executive Administrator nonsense. Annex B lists indicative incident information to be shared if available, incident trend data including number of ransomware incidents, size of the initial ransom demand, whether the victim intended to pay the ransom demand, and details which third parties such as insurance firm, legal firm, or ransom negotiation company are supporting the victim. Now, does that sound like something that would relate to water? Incident-specific data including the identity of victim organizations, whether they have been reported to NCSC or amenable to doing so, details of the incident and the extent of the impact, and whether they have any technical information they are willing to share with the NCSC. Next thing we've got is the Memorandum of Understanding between the United States Department of Agriculture, Natural Resources Conservation Service, and Environmental Protection Agency, Office of Water. Here we've got a little blurb. The goal of this MOU is to maintain and strengthen a framework for cooperation between NC blah blah blah, supports voluntary conservation and management of productive agricultural lands to, voluntary as in they're volunteering to do it. That's what it really means. It doesn't mean voluntary as in the way most people would think of it, where, somebody signs on board to something out of complete volition. They're like you join an organization that you weren't forced into. That's considered voluntary. So they're not being forced into doing this. That's where the voluntary comes in. Not the one way that you would normally think. So they're going to reduce non-point source pollution and safeguard, maintain, and or improve the quality of nation's waterways, including those that serve as sources of drinking water. Well, isn't that nice? Conservation programs covered by this requirement include the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, the Conservation Stewardship Program, CSP, and the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, EQIP, and the Regional Conservation Partnerships Program, RCPP. The Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, authorizes funding for these NRS or NRCs or whatever conservation programs, and the source water provisions applied to this IRA funding. Interestingly, the word IRA
Also applies to things like Roth IRA, that type of stuff, so-called investments. The EPA's Clean Water State Revolving Fund and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, which received substantial investments under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 2021, also known as 2021 Bipartisan Infrastructure Law Bill. Love how they're calling them investments. Leverage resources and funding to assist agricultural communities in adopting conservation practices that benefit water quality. There you've got your word there. Leverage resources. That means they are going to, through threat, force individuals to follow and adopt destructive plans, or else. That's what that means. Collaborate to expand leveraging opportunities between EPA and NRCS tribal assistance programs to support tribal water quality programs. It is very commonly known that in business circles, the word leverage is a nice way of saying blackmail, essentially. You go to somebody and you say, I have pictures of your dalliances outside of your marriage that I will spread around your company if you don't do what I say. And thus you have, quote unquote, leverage. Improve EPA and USDA program performance and communicate water quality outcomes and success stories. So there's your little censorship cloaked in a bunch of nice little words there. Special paragraph regarding data confidentiality. Of course, they're going to have this. Any such third party must execute a confidentiality agreement prior to obtaining access to protected data. And that the provisions of such confidentiality agreement are a continuing obligation, and that any third party will continue to be legally, that means by paperwork, bound to the confidentiality provisions even when such third party is no longer under contract or obligation to EPA Office of Water. That's called a gag order. Boy, what on earth could they have that requires such extensive control and security? One has to wonder, data provided by NRCS to the EPA Office of Water must be returned to the NRCS. This sounds exactly like that thing we just read before, right? Except they're completely different countries, apparently. And or destroyed by the EPA Office of Water and any third parties with whom the EPA Office of Water shared the data only in a manner consistent with blah, blah, blah. So anyway, under the principal contacts, we have an interesting name here. Yu Ting Gilaran. Somehow that doesn't even sound like a real name. Deputy Director, Office of Groundwater and Drinking Water, Office of Water, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And here we've got Benita Best Wong. Like, they're not even trying with these names. They're so awful. It was digitally signed January 7th, 2025. Alrighty. Now the next one is a memorandum of understanding regarding the regional water sales agreement with the City of Portland and 19 current wholesale customers. And just to skip to the back, the wholesale customers are, as you would expect, Burlington Water District, Gresham City of, Lake Grove Water District, Lusted Water District, and blah, blah, blah. So they're basically just all like, the same people just pretending that they're somehow separate from each other and a bunch of other nonsense. Anyway, the parties agree on the importance of creating a fair and equitable new agreement that shares the reasonable costs associated with building, operating, and maintaining a regional water supply system. Boy, doesn't that sound exactly like the almost exact carbon copy wording of those international global control documents about establishing unilateral and cooperative measures that streamline and centralize all this nonsense? The parties intend to work together collaboratively to develop the new agreement with the final draft completed by June 30th, 2022. With this MOU, Portland is stating its desire to continue selling water to all current wholesale customers who intend to purchase water from Portland. Because you have no other option for water, the parties intend to jointly develop new agreement that will govern the terms of sale of that agreement to the wholesale customers beyond the 2026 expiration date of the current agreement. And of course, all of these customers are other cities or other states. It's not like, some random person who's got a construction company is going here and saying, I need to buy some water, Anyway, it's signed Administrator, Portland Water Bureau. So yeah, that's nice. You just got an administrator somewhere who's just making up laws and a whole bunch of other stuff. Stuff's pretty crazy. So, as usual, we're back to the Environmental Protection Agency. Now, there is no nasty or heinous activity that is outside of the realm of anything emblazoned with the word Environmental Protection Agency. I think a lot of people are aware that pretty much anytime the Environmental Protection Agency is involved, there's some awful, nasty plan that is in operation. And of course, this is also a cover for special controlled garbage facilities for them to dump along with basically, dump with regular trash the used up bodies of children. August 4th, 2022, preliminary funding of no significant impact to all interested citizens. I love that word there. To all interested citizens. Organizations and government agencies. City of Lancaster, Fairfield County, North Water Treatment Plant Replacement, loan number FS 390504 00 or -0033. Ohio EPA analyzes environmental effects of proposed projects as part of its WSRLA program review and approval process. We have conducted that the proposed project should not result in significant adverse environmental impacts, and we're of course to see this is repeated in many places. More information can be obtained by contacting the person named at the end of the attached EA. Any comments on a preliminary determination should be sent to the email address of the contact named at the end of the EA. We will not act on this project for 30 calendar days from the date of this notice. In the absence of substantive, who says that? Comments. That's sort of like basically saying, we know we're going to get a load of crap, but we're just going to ignore it because none of them are substantive comments. During this period, our preliminary decision will become final. Oh, that's nice. Our decision is final. After that, the City of Lancaster can then proceed with its application for the WSRLA loan. Sincerely, Assistant Chief Kathleen Courtright. There's no way that's a real... That's got to be a fake cover identity. Well, cover identity, whatever. Fake or otherwise. City of Lancaster and Fairfield County has requested $87,718,425 from the Ohio Water Supply Revolving Loan Account. Doesn't that sound pretty strongly similar to the other documents that we read, especially those about the United Nations and other foreign entities desiring unilateral, complete, well, by other words, control of water resources around the globe? To construct a new water treatment plant at the intersection of Memorial Drive and West 6th Avenue in Miller Park to accommodate potential growth and development in and around the city of Lancaster. I think I'm going to go ahead and move into a mansion to accommodate the potential that I have for $1 billion to come into my possession. I think I'm going to do that. The new water treatment plant, WTP, will replace the existing Miller Park WTP and include the construction of 5 new wells and associated piping. Now here at the bottom of this page, we have an outright, complete, utterly blatant lie. Lancaster Miller Park Water Treatment Plant, or WTP, located in downtown Lancaster. It's not located in downtown Lancaster, and also it's... well, whatever. Anyway, it's also not called the Lancaster Miller Park WTP. It's like the Miller Park North or North Water Treatment, whatever. Was originally constructed in 1932. No, it wasn't. The Miller Park WTP was modernized in 1959. No, it wasn't. To meet the city's growing water demand and was last upgraded in 1976 to again add capacity to support the city's growth. And no, it wasn't. After 95 years of treatment, the Miller Park WTP has now reached the end of its useful life. No, it hasn't. With the current condition of the building and antiquated equipment, It has been determined that the existing Miller Park WTP, of which there is none, should not be upgraded but instead be replaced by a completely new plant. And that's not true. 3 alternatives were considered to address the existing and future conditions described here. I love this. This is so. This stuff's so comical, but it's almost sad that it's in fact real and actually being done. Just how asinine this stuff is. Do nothing. The city has the option to leave I love how they just declare this stuff. The city has the option to, well, if they do or don't, it's up to them. The city, whoever they are, has the option to leave the current Miller Park WTP. There is no current Miller Park WTP water treatment plant operating under its current capacity. However, this will leave the city continuing to use an aged treatment facility, which doesn't exist, unable to support the planned commercial/industrial growth within its service area. The planned industrial commercial growth. Yikes. The construction footprint for this project will remain within the previously disturbed footprint of Miller Park and located next to the existing water treatment plant, which doesn't exist, thereby minimizing the effects on environmental resources. The contractor is responsible for best management and practices. The contractor is responsible for best management practices to control erosion and sedimentation and minimize the creation of dust during construction. So if it happens, it's the contractor's fault. This stuff's crazy. Project costs, they plan to borrow that number I mentioned before. During the 20-year loan period, Lancaster will save $13,369,192 by using WSRLA dollars at the standard rate of 2.36% compared to the market rate of 3.61%. The anticipated loan award will occur in September 2022, and construction is expected to begin after financial assistance is awarded and could be completed by October 2024. Construction of this project could affect environmental features, but the effects will be reduced or mitigated to acceptable levels, as explained below. Construction will occur in previously disturbed areas immediately adjacent to the existing water treatment plant, which does not exist. No change to land use or topography will occur, and that's not true either. Interestingly, the point of contact, a Kristen Parrish, nice name, Ohio EPA DEFA, has a P.O. Box 1049 Columbus, Ohio. That's nice, using a P.O. Box. Now this map right here is incredibly inaccurate. It lists the existing water treatment plant basically around where the parking lot for the jail, the sheriff's parking lot for the jail is located, down here. And even if you did a Google map search, you would see that where they have this located, but this is just some lazy crap where they just put like arrows and names on it, because the North Water Treatment Plant that they're planning on building is not even pointing to the actual location of where it is. So I did that work for you. I have here circled the constructed North Water Treatment Plant. Now all you have here is Miller Park on Google Maps. There is nothing related to the construction for the water treatment plant, nor the other things around it. So I'll just go ahead and highlight this. First of all, there is a massive earth berm that was built up as part of their construction project right about here. There is a pool and a skate park and a dog park, and there is a water treatment office down here. And if they're talking about the office, that's not a water treatment plant. Never has been. The actual land on which the water treatment plant is constructed, and I bet all of this stuff has mostly been scrubbed, or if not will be after this video. This was a Fairfield Christian Academy football field. That's what they built it on, a football field. And it is downhill from 2 gas stations, almost directly downhill from 2 gas stations. So, yeah, that's some interesting stuff there. Now here's a picture of it from the corner across the street adjacent. And as you can see by this picture, the whole facility is part mostly hidden by its location, which is built on where the old canal used to be. It's a floodplain where the old canal used to be. And it's built all the way down there, obviously, to conceal its bulk, of which this facility is immense, and I have to believe has purposes far beyond water, simple water. There's, it looks ominous, and it looks like some type of access control point facility, and its location is, in fact, at a important intersection. The other facility they have being the jail, this ominous, awful, dystopian, Stalinistic looking construction monstrosity that's been there for a while, is also one of those at a particularly strategic point with clear line of sight around. But this construction looks more like they're trying to conceal it. But not only that, obviously, they completely lied. Absolutely, about there being an existing facility there. There never was. And I'm sure if you Google it, everything's going to reflect this narrative in this document. But not only that, it's right down from 2 gas stations, which have underground gas reserves, and no rational person can look at that and say that's not going to be some sort of toxic hazard. Of course, they don't care when they're just going to poison everybody's water anyway and kill everybody and wreak mayhem and stuff because they, quote unquote, are authorized to control, as they see fit, everything under their domain, part of their kingdom or empire. Anyway, that is, even though there's, of course, quite a lot more, I think all of those different elements are sufficient to create an image, a picture of really what's going on. You have this financial control cartel attempting to leverage their quote-unquote water resources to continue, or for continuity of what they believe to be their empire.